Before we get into the video, could everyone please subscribe to my channel? Thank you so much. After Eli passed, I told myself I'd only stay a few months, just long enough to help Taryn get her footing. She was juggling grief, toddler twins, and a husband who worked unpredictable hours. I had the time, the energy, and the instinct. So I moved in? That was 3 years ago. At first it felt good to be needed. I woke early, packed school lunches, and rotated loads of laundry. I took my pension and slotted it into the cracks. Their paychecks couldn't reach groceries, electricity, and daycare deposits. I paid without fuss. That's what family does, I told myself. But as the months passed, the thank yous thinned out. The favors became expectations, and the space I occupied, physically and emotionally, grew smaller. Tehran stopped asking if I'd join them for dinner. The twins started calling Betty Niles's mother the other grandma, even though she lived across town and rarely showed up. I'd mention Eli now and then, only to be met with silence, as if he were an old TV show no one watched anymore. Still, I stayed. I cooked the meals, adjusted to the thermostat they locked at 68, and ignored the sideways glances when I watched my crime shows too loud. I told myself I was lucky to be close to my grandchildren, that this was what late life looked like, useful, if not cherished. Then last Tuesday night, as I was folding the boys' socks, Taryn came into the laundry room holding her phone like a shield. "Mom," she said, not quite meeting my eyes, "Niles's parents are moving in." I blinked, a sock still in my hand. "They're visiting." "No, moving in for good. We need the space." I chuckled, waiting for the smile to follow. It didn't. "You'll need to leave by the end of the month," she said. That time I laughed out loud. I couldn't help it. It sounded absurd, like a bad sitcom line. But her face stayed flat, arms crossed. She meant it. I placed the socks in the basket slowly, as if movement might delay reality. Then I stood up and walked past her, calm and quiet. In the hallway, I caught a glimpse of our family photo on the shelf. My frame, my print. But I wasn't in it anymore. The office door was already open. Boxes were stacked inside. By the next morning, the shift had already begun. Taryn knocked lightly on my door like I was a guest borrowing space. She stepped in with a plastic smile and a Sharpie in her hand. "Hey, do you mind starting to pack up some of your non-essentials? Just so we can start making room for the in-laws. I figured the office closet could hold some of your stuff temporarily." Non-essentials. I looked around the room. Everything in it was mine. The quilt on the bed, the bookshelf, even the lamp on the dresser. But I nodded and said, "Sure." Later that afternoon, she poked her head into the kitchen while I was prepping dinner. "Also, quick thing. Bet's allergic to a lot of stuff. Strong smells can trigger her sinuses. Maybe go light on the curry and garlic for a while." I stirred the pot slowly. Of course, that night I was carrying towels to the laundry room when I heard them talking in the living room. I paused at the edge of the hallway, hidden by the half wall. "We'll put Bet in the master," Tan was saying. "Dorian can have the downstairs guest room. What about Mom?" Niles asked. There was a pause. Then her voice, clipped and casual, said, "She can go wherever. Maybe the boys can bunk together and we convert our room for the kids." Niles didn't respond. I crept back to my room, towels forgotten. My chest felt tight, like I'd inhaled something sharp. In the days that followed, I began to see the house differently. The groceries were changing. No more of the coffee I liked, less fruit, more prepackaged meals. The thermostat was set to a frigid 66, and no one offered me a blanket. At dinner, the seating rearranged itself. Bet's chair was already placed beside the boys, as if anticipating her arrival. Mine stayed tucked in under the corner of the table, untouched. The boys had stopped asking me for bedtime stories. Taryn said they were getting too old for that. I started spending evenings alone in my room, eating on a tray, watching old home movies with the volume low. I made a habit of walking through the house late at night, barefoot and silent. It was the only time it felt like mine. I'd flick on the porch light, check the locks, fold a stray blanket. Little routines like muscle memory from a life I was still living, but no longer invited to. That was when I started paying attention to the inventory. Not just what I owned, but what I was no longer welcome to use. Camille stirred her tea slowly, her brow knit tight as she watched me across the table. We met at Finch's Cafe every first Thursday, but this time felt different. I hadn't said much since sitting down. "They're not easing you out," she said finally, placing her spoon down. They've already erased you. I let out a soft laugh, more breath than sound. I know, I said. But hearing you say it out loud, it hits different. Back home, I opened my laptop and logged into my bank account. Wasn't something I did often. I've never been someone to measure love in dollars. But something about Camille's words clung to me like steam. I went through the statements month by month. Grocery runs, utility auto-pays, checks written directly to Taryn for extras. I started a spreadsheet. When I finished, the total hovered over $26,000. I leaned back in my chair, the number pulsing in my mind. $26,000 from a fixed income. Quiet dollars that kept their family running unacknowledged and unthanked. I opened a drawer and pulled out an old manila folder. Inside was the paperwork I'd collected years ago, when I was thinking about buying a small condo after Eli passed. I'd had a deposit ready. I was days from signing when Taryn called in tears. The twins' daycare cost had doubled overnight. Niles was between jobs. I'd wired the deposit to her the next day. She'd cried on the phone, promised to pay me back. That was nearly 3 years ago. I closed the folder and held it in my lap, the edges soft from handling. My hands didn't tremble, not yet. But something inside me shifted. This wasn't about space anymore. It wasn't about Bet's allergies or spare rooms or meal planning. It was about being useful until I wasn't needed, until I became inconvenient. I set the folder on the kitchen counter and stared at it for a long time. Then I reached into the drawer again, this time for a pen, and scribbled a quiet note on a sticky pad. Find the paperwork. Get it in writing. Track it all! The page stuck there like a warning or a promise. I waited until the boys were outside riding their bikes before I asked her. Taryn was in the kitchen stirring a pot of something store-bought and bland. I stood just beyond the counter, hands folded in front of me like I had to make an appointment. Where do you expect me to go? She didn't look up. I don't know, Mom. You're smart. You'll figure it out. I blinked, letting the silence settle between us. Niles's parents really need the stability right now, she added, like that made it less cruel. They're getting older. His mom's pre-diabetic, and his dad's got back issues. They need care. I nearly laughed as if I hadn't been the one getting up early to shovel the snow, taking the boys to doctor's appointments, and cooking meals from scratch. As if I hadn't kept this house running when both she and Niles were barely holding it together. You've had a good run here, she said, finally turning to face me. It's time. It's time. Like I'd been on some extended vacation I should be grateful for. Like I hadn't given up my own life to fit into theirs. I nodded slowly. Right. I walked into the living room without another word, and that's when I saw it. The family photo that used to sit above the mantel, the one from the summer we all went to Lake Geneva, where Eli's arm was wrapped around my shoulder and the boys were sticky with popsicle juice, was gone. In its place was a framed photo of Niles as a child, standing beside a boy I didn't recognize. The frame was new, gold-edged, polished, prominent. I stood there staring at it longer than I meant to. When I turned around, Taryn had already gone upstairs. That night, while the rest of the house buzzed with talk of arrival dates and allergen-free mattress covers, I took my tea into the garage and sat on the cool step beside the dryer. I pulled out the small notebook I'd kept since Eli passed and wrote down 2 lines. This is no longer my home, but it's not theirs yet either. I closed the book and tucked it back in my sweater pocket. Then I opened the cabinet above the washing machine and started making a mental list. I started with the washer and dryer. I'd bought them after the old set broke midweek during flu season. Taryn was frantic. Niles was out of town. I'd gone down to the appliance store the next morning and paid in full. The receipt was still in my inbox, dated 2 years ago. I printed it out and placed it in a new folder I labeled in pencil, Personal Assets. Next was the dining table. I remembered measuring the space with Camille, comparing wood finishes, making sure it had enough leaf extensions for Thanksgiving. That table had hosted every birthday dinner since Eli passed, every school project, every spilled bowl of cereal. I'd paid with a check. The carbon copy was still in my desk drawer. The air purifier came during allergy season when Taryn complained about the boys coughing at night. The Instant Pot was a Christmas gift to myself because no one else had thought to get me one that year. I walked through the house slowly, eyes lingering on things I'd stopped thinking about long ago. The standing lamp in the corner of the living room, the shelf in the hall where I kept extra batteries and extension cords, the small rug in the foyer that I bought after slipping on the tile once. Every object had a story, a quiet, invisible record of service. I opened a new document on my laptop and began making a list. Not just what I'd purchased, but when, how much, and why. I cross-checked credit card statements, store accounts, and PayPal receipts. The numbers were steady, the narrative clear. By the time the boys were in bed and the hallway lights dimmed, I had gathered 3 folders worth of receipts and printed records. I slid them under my mattress, tucked deep in the corner, and stared at the ceiling for a long while. Just before midnight, I opened a private browser window and booked a weekend room at a short-term rental 15 minutes away. I used a different last name, just a test, I told myself. A trial run, nothing more. I waited until Friday. Taryn had a work retreat, and Niles was scheduled to take the twins to their karate class and then swing by his parents' house. That gave me a clean window of 4 hours, long enough if I stuck to the plan. I parked the borrowed van down the block and texted Camille, "Ready." She arrived 10 minutes later with her sleeves rolled up and a steely look in her eyes. We moved quietly, methodically. No slamming drawers, no dragging chairs, just measured steps and zipped duffels. We started with the master closet, my linens, winter coats, the sewing machine tucked behind an old humidifier. Next came the living room. I rolled up the rug, the one I bought after nearly slipping on the slick tile. Camille boxed up the books. She paused when she found the one with Eli's handwriting in the margins, then passed it to me without a word. The kitchen took the longest. Every pan, every utensil I'd purchased, every small appliance I'd restocked over the years, it all went. The shelves were left clean but empty, except for a few mismatched mugs and a cracked colander. I even took the Instant Pot, especially the Instant Pot. We left the dining table for last. I wiped it down one final time before disassembling the leaf extensions and wrapping the chairs in old blankets. Camille shook her head as we worked. "They're going to walk in and think the house imploded." "No," I said. "They're going to walk in and see what they built when they removed me." By noon, the van was full. I gave the house one last walkthrough, not to reminisce, but to ensure every corner I'd touched was accounted for. Then I sat at the kitchen counter and placed a single sheet of paper down where they'd be sure to see it. I'd typed it the night before, printed it at the library, and signed it in blue ink. What I paid for, I took. What you threw away, you can keep. No love, no signature, just truth. Camille and I drove the van to the new rental, a tiny furnished studio with chipped countertops and a faulty heater. But the lock clicked under my key. The thermostat responded to my touch. The silence belonged to me. That night, I made tea in my own mug in a kitchen that didn't resent me and wrote a new list, this time of things I wouldn't miss. The locksmith arrived early, a thin man named Jonah, who smelled faintly of coffee and metal. I offered him a glass of water, but he shook his head politely and got straight to work. It took less than 20 minutes to change the deadbolt. When he handed me the new set of keys, I held them in my palm longer than I needed to. They felt warm, real. I signed the lease that same afternoon. A 1-page document. No fuss, no hidden language, just a monthly rent I could cover, even without dipping into my pension. I set up autopay from a savings account Taryn didn't know existed. I'd started it right after Eli died, squirreling away small deposits here and there. Back then, I hadn't known what I was saving for. Now I did. That evening, as I was unpacking dishes in my kitchenette, there was a knock on the door. I hesitated, still bracing for reprimands or needs that weren't mine. But when I opened, a woman stood there with a warm smile and a tin of cookies. "Name's Leota," she said. "Unit 3B. I saw you moving in. We play cards Thursday nights down in the rec room. You should come." I nodded, surprised at how quickly the yes came out of me. An hour later, I was sitting at a folding table with Leota and 3 other widows, one divorced, all retired, laughing over terrible hands and strong decaf coffee. Nobody asked me to clean up. Nobody talked over me. Nobody expected anything but my presence. I walked back to my apartment with a strange looseness in my chest, like a knot had been undone. I made scrambled eggs on my small electric stove, sat, cross-legged on the futon, and ate in the quiet glow of a lamp I'd chosen for myself. The old house was still echoing somewhere in my mind, but its grip had loosened. I slept with the door locked, the windows cracked, and the keys tucked under my pillow. Not out of fear, but out of habit. A habit I was finally ready to outgrow. The first call came at 9:13 a.m. I let it ring. I knew that tone, tight, clipped, annoyed. She didn't leave a voicemail. The second call came 20 minutes later. This time, she left a message. "Hey, Mom, just wondering if you, maybe took more than you needed. The fridge is completely empty. Did you mean to take all the pots too?" By noon, she'd called 5 times. The sixth came at 1:04 p.m., with a voicemail that started tight and unraveled quickly. "The twins are crying because they can't find their cereal and the stove's not working. Niles is trying to fix it, but it's not the same. Where's the Instant Pot? Did you really take the washer?" Yes, I had. I was sitting at my little fold-out table drinking tea from a cup I didn't have to share when voicemail number 8 came in. "Mom, come on, this is a lot. We didn't expect everything to be gone. Could you at least drop off some of the stuff for the kids? I mean, seriously, who takes the air purifier?" Someone who bought it, I thought. By the 10th call, the edge in her voice was replaced with something else. "Look, maybe I didn't say things the right way. I was stressed. Niles's parents aren't even helping yet. They've just added more chaos. I didn't mean for you to feel unwanted. It wasn't about how I felt. It was about what I'd finally accepted." Call 11 came after dark. She sounded tired. "Horaro. Mom, please. I didn't mean for it to come out like that. Come back. The boys keep asking where you are. I didn't think you'd actually leave." I watched the phone screen fade to black on the 12th call and turned the ringer off. Later that night, I stood at my window and looked out at the street below, quiet, still unbothered by everything unraveling in that house across town. I wasn't needed anymore until I was missed. There's a difference. I rinsed my teacup, dried it with a towel I bought myself, and placed it back on the shelf I had drilled into the wall with my own hands. The lawyer's office was quiet, tucked between a dry cleaner and a flower shop downtown. Miss Howren, soft-spoken but direct, reviewed my notes and receipts without judgment. She nodded as she flipped through the folder. I'd brought bank statements, appliance invoices, even a faded grocery ledger I'd kept on a whim. "No formal lease," she said, "but plenty of evidence. You'd be considered a contributing tenant, which carries legal protections. If you want reimbursement, we can draft a claim, or you can walk away entirely. That's your choice." I nodded, but I already knew. I didn't want their money. I wanted the dignity they'd taken for granted. That night, I wrote the letter. I didn't overthink it. Taryn, I wasn't just living there. I was investing my time, my money, my care. You treated me like a tenant when it suited you and a burden when it didn't. I didn't leave because I was hurt. I left because I remembered who I am. You've lost a housekeeper, a cook, a babysitter, but more than that, you've lost your mother. That cost won't show up in your bank app, but it will in your home, Maris. I folded it neatly, slipped it into an envelope, and dropped it at the post office the next morning. No return address. By the time I got back, Leota had left a pie on my doorstep and a note that said, "See you Thursday. Bring your sass." I smiled, unlocked the door, and stepped back into my own space. Camille showed up with a bottle of boxed wine, 2 plastic cups, and a grocery bag full of crackers and cheese. She looked around my small studio and nodded approvingly. "It's cozy," she said, kicking off her shoes, "and smells like no one's been yelling in it." We sat on the futon and toasted like college girls, laughing until we wheezed. For the first time in years, there was no clock watching, no one needing anything. No corrections about the thermostat or how I folded towels, just 2 women who had known each other long enough to laugh with their whole bodies. The next day, Leota knocked on my door holding a hand-stitched potholder, purple floral with gold trim. "Housewarming gift," she said, "made it back when I had steadier hands." I thanked her and hung it on the oven handle. It felt right there, like something earned, not expected. A few days later, a thick envelope arrived in the mail. Inside was a crayon drawing taped to a flimsy paper plate. It showed a tiny house with a crooked chimney and stick figures in front, 2 small boys. At the top, in careful, uneven letters, it said, Grandma's house. I pressed it to my chest for a long moment before sticking it to the fridge with a magnet. I no longer had a formal dining room or the master suite or a hallway lined with family photos, but I had peace. And this time, I wasn't just in the house. I owned the peace inside.